we're going to be discussing contracts. If you look at the screen, you'll see that there's a thing called Introducing Contracts for Guides 101, Exploring Contracts for Guides 102, and Introducing Financials for Guides 103. We're not going through all of this today, so don't panic. We're only doing 101. There's way too much to actually be able to do everything in one go. Okay, right, so I'm figuring out how to use a mouse in Microsoft Office on a Windows machine. I'm used to Mac. And this is very different. And so the first thing that we're looking at is general terminology. And the reason we're looking at general terminology, that's left. Okay, why did we include the section? The reason we included the section is because when we started lockdown, we realized, and don't feel offended, it's just a generalization, it doesn't necessarily apply to you. And it is that there's a big gap in the understanding of the big picture in tourism for guides. Most guides don't seem to actually know the role that is played by a tour operator, the role that's played by a destination management company. So we decided that we would have to first explain some of the basics before actually getting to the business of contracts. So if we start looking at these different abbreviations and acronyms that are in use, it's because of this lack of knowledge that it's difficult for guides to actually establish the framework and understand the legal aspects. So we then started seeing whereabouts in the CATCITA qualification does the legal framework exist. And it forms part of the unit standard that you need to cover if you're becoming a national guide. It is not part of the unit standards that are required for guides on skills programs or even becoming a provincial guide. So this means that if you haven't done national guide qualification, you haven't actually looked at legal at all. So it's understandable that you don't know what a contract is and how a contract works. But this is a point that I need to emphasize right at the start, and everybody must understand this. Tourism is changing. I think you've all figured that part out already. And after COVID, guides will need to think very differently about how they integrate themselves with industry. Tour operators are going to be looking at ways to make changes that are beneficial for them. And they will also work with guides that can work in the same framework. So you will need to align yourselves more with industry, and you will have to start thinking of yourselves as part of industry and also as businesses. A guide that thinks work is going to come isn't going to survive. A guide needs to market themselves as a business and see themselves as a business. And in order for this to happen, the guide will have to understand the legal framework. So part of that, you need to keep proper records. I've seen invoices over the last 2 years. We have been helping guides with problems where operators hadn't paid them. And we've required the guides to send us the proof of the actual agreement between themselves and the operator. In most cases, there was no contract, there was no proper email trace of the booking, and there was no proper record. Some of the invoices weren't invoices, they were little handwritten notes out of a receipt book. That needs to change. So we're going to look at all these things during the course, but let's start with the first part of the actual acronyms. So I've mentioned here principals and employers. The reason I've used the word principal is that the word principal doesn't necessarily imply an employer. The word employer does imply the word employee. And I think you're all familiar with the fact that some guides believe they are freelance and therefore independent contractors, and some operators treat them as employees and not independent contractors. So let's look at the word principal, not the word employer. And if we look at that, it says that the principal is the primary contact that provides the tourism product to the client. The client is the end user or the tourist, and the tourism product is the tour package. So the primary contact is the person with whom the client has made contact, and that is the person that's actually in charge of the whole deal. You will be working for that principal. That principal will provide the product either using in-house capabilities or subcontracted service providers. So the relationship between that principal and the subcontracted service provider is what determines whether the service provider is an independent contractor or an employee. Okay, I hope I haven't lost anybody yet. So if we consider the principal as an employer, when does this happen? This happens if the product, in other words, the tour or the tour package, is delivered by employees, that could be in-house staff, full-time employed tourist guides would be employees, or by contracted workers and freelancers who do not fulfill the necessary criteria to be classified as independent contractors. Many guides think that if they work for themselves, they do not have a contract of employment, they work maybe for 3 different tour operators, that makes them a freelancer who is an independent contractor. Not so. If you work more than 24 hours in a month for an employer, and you do this for 3 months in a row, you can be considered an employee. Right, so that's where the UIF issue came up that most of you are familiar with already. And so what are operators? Operators are the people that deliver the tourism product to the client. The product can be a standalone product such as a tour, or it can be a packaged product. And you guys all know what a package is. That includes all sorts of things. It includes transport, accommodation, meals, the guide. So the client can be defined as either an end user, a tourist, or it can be an overseas agent or a wholesaler. It can be a hotel that is selling the tour on. It can be a local tour operator. It can even be a destination management company. So that operator may provide the product directly using in-house staff or subcontracted services, as we've mentioned before. And there are different kinds of operators. This is the one that really boggled me. Some guides did not know what a TO was. We received emails from people saying, what is a TO? Well, a TO is an abbreviation. It means tour operator. We use it regularly. It is an operator that delivers the product to the client, and that TO sometimes has vehicles. Those vehicles are often referred to as wheels. So if you want to register as a tour operator with an organization such as SATSA, they have 2 categories. They have tour operator and tour operator with wheels. You also have operators that operate only wheels. They don't sell tours. They just sell vehicles to other tour operators that need them. So those are called wheels operators. What's important for you as a guide when you're working in a vehicle that belongs to company A, but you're actually working for company B, you need to know, are you working for the tour operator or are you working for the wheels operator? Because you need to know who you're going to be submitting your claim to. And it's not always the same. Some operators book the guide and they book the vehicle from somebody else as a self-drive option. Other operators give the guide an itinerary, but they don't book the guide. The guide is booked by the wheels operator. So this all affects who is liable for damage to the vehicle. Maybe the guide damages the vehicle and suddenly the guide finds out that the guide has to pay. That's the kind of thing that is to be set out in contracts. Also, does the wheels operator have a passenger liability that covers the guide if there's an accident? Because you were working. You weren't one of the passengers on the passenger manifesto. You were not covered as a tourist, but you were in the vehicle when there was an accident. So those are the kind of things that we will have to look at again once tourism picks up, because they're very important and there are little gray areas where guides have often fallen through the cracks. So wheels operators, we've already covered. It is the people that subcontract vehicles. They usually provide the vehicle with a driver, but sometimes they provide it as a self-drive. Now, what we didn't mention before, the vehicle has to have licenses, permits, insurance. If you're a guide and you are driving this vehicle, you are responsible for checking that the documentation is valid and up to date. If you get stopped at a roadblock and the permit on the windscreen has expired, it's not only the wheels operator that will get the fine, you will get the fine in your personal name because you were driving an illegal vehicle. So you need to look at things like that. You need to look at permits, and you need to look at licenses, and you need to look at insurances. Is there an insurance policy with the vehicle? Before that vehicle leaves the depot, does it have all the documentation that is required by law? Because you are liable as the driver guide. If you're on a coach and the coach has a guide on board, which is you, and a driver who works for the wheels operator, you might still be implicated because you're the guide on board if you haven't checked the documents. Right, so you need to know, are you working for the tour operator or the wheels operator? And are the documents right? You also have activities operators. Now, many tour operators are activities operators. But let's look at this category separately. This is typically somebody that runs a boat cruise like Advantage in St. Lucia, or an open vehicle game drive like Hula in the Kruger National Park, or abseiling, or kayaking, or zip lines. Usually a culture guide is not qualified to supervise and facilitate these activities. Some cases, maybe. So when you go on these activities, you might be accompanying clients that you have brought to a specific activity, but there will be a local guide operated or operating the activity for the activities operator. The question you need to ask yourself is, does the liability cover of the activity operator provide for you in a non-guiding capacity in the event of an accident when you're accompanying the people? Are you covered? So this is another thing we need to look at when we start looking at contracts. Right, lodges. Most lodges are also activities operators. So you go to a big 5-star guest house in the Kruger National Park, adjacent reserves, somewhere in the Greater Kruger, say in the Sabi Sand. And they have their own qualified nature guides that are offering activities. Or you go to a lodge on the coast near Isimangaliso, and you will see that they have adventure guides that take people snorkeling and on bike trails. So once again, when you are working for ATO and you are at that lodge, are you covered by the liability cover of the lodge? Because you're participating in activities in a non-guiding capacity. If there's an accident, do you have liability cover? Remember, you signed that indemnity waiver when you checked in at the lodge. So you signed an indemnity waiver. Maybe something happens. It's not the fault of the lodge because they were not negligent, but were you covered by the insurance? Hotels and B&Bs, in many cases, they operate the same as a lodge. But sometimes they have an activities desk. And that activities desk might not belong to the hotel or the B&B. It might belong to an activities operator who has a contract with the hotel or B&B. Possibly even one that has an agreement with the concierge desk and takes bookings, charges the clients direct, and then pays a commission to the concierge desk for the privilege of being inside the hotel. So you need to know, this desk, does it belong to the hotel or does it belong to an external operator? If you're working for their hospitality desk, are you working for the hotel? Are you providing services directly to the tourist? Who are you working for? It's important to know these things. A lot of guides will accept the job, they will do the job, and they won't actually know who they're working for at the end of the day because they just assume that that desk belongs to the hotel, where it might not be. Okay. Entrepreneur guides. This is a word that I was given yesterday. I always refer to them as operator guides. Now, you guys know that there's lots of different kinds of entrepreneur guides. You get the guys that own a guest house and they decided that they wanted to offer to operator services to their guests. So they did a course and they registered as a guide. You have the ones that have an agreement with the concierge or run their own hospitality desk in a hotel. You have the ones that take direct bookings from tourists or from overseas operators. And I know there are a lot of them. They usually small operators with 1 or 2 vehicles, and they happily carry on with life taking bookings from overseas direct. So it's a very common category. And typically, it's a category that exists where the guide can offer a service that is exclusive, customized, private, and has minimal overheads. So it will be the case with walking tours, adventure activities, and even some of the people that own one game drive vehicle, one open safari vehicle for the Kruger National Park, and they operate that vehicle in the park. So those are all entrepreneurs. And what's important in this case is that one of these entrepreneurs will often offer a service as a subcontracted operator to a larger TO. So you're a large TO, you have a guide on tour, that guide arrives at the Kruger National Park area and stays overnight in a hotel in Hazyview. And in the morning, the clients and the guide go into the Kruger Park with an entrepreneur guide that owns one open safari vehicle. So it's important for that owner of that open safari vehicle to know if they are being treated as an employee or as an independent contractor, because they are a guide, they are an entrepreneur, and they have a business. But if their business derives from just one operator that books them every day for, let's say, 4 days a week, they might actually not be seen as an independent contractor. There was recently a case where Uber retrenched drivers. We all know that the drivers at Uber either own the vehicles or work for people that own the vehicles. Uber was taken to court, and the CCMA, that's the Council for Conciliation and Arbitration, Mediation and Arbitration, there we go, Zania, the legal expert, helped me. The CCMA basically went against the common belief and said that Uber was an employer and Uber could not cancel the contract unilaterally.
Yay.
Right. So let's have a look at what contractors are. The primary contact that provides the tourism package is the principal. We've said that. Now, they might be using different service providers. And these service providers will either be truly independent or they will be employees. So what are you? Are you an independent contractor or an employee? We said that it's all about fulfilling requirements. Now, those requirements are covered by various tests. These tests qualify the relationship, and we will have a look at how these tests apply to guides. So if you look at first the three standard categories, culture guide, nature guide, and adventure guide, there's often an overlap. And what is really sad about this is that there is no common terminology used to describe the various skills levels. That's one thing that needs to be standardized if we want the industry to be more professional. And an example is the word site guide. What is a site guide? Now, as a culture guide, if I look at the word site guide, I think that it refers to somebody operating in a limited geographical area, such as a township or a national park. But in adventure guiding, the site guide does not refer to you can only operate on Table Mountain or you can only operate on Cathkin Peak. What it says is that your level of skill is given by the site, and the site can be a type of environment such as mountains above a certain altitude with snow in winter. And other guides are not allowed to operate there because they do not have that qualification yet. So the word site is used differently. So to avoid confusion, I will stop using the word site here, and I will refer to what I normally call a site guide as a local guide. And that means that it includes community guides as well. So if you go to a community and that community has guides that take you on little walks around the community and show you how things work, those are local guides. The guide in the Kruger National Park driving the open safari vehicle is a local guide. The guide taking people for a walk up Table Mountain is a local guide. Right, so how do different types of guides find work? If you're a culture guide, there are different kinds of employment. You can be working full-time for a tour operator. And I think most of you are aware that if you work full-time for a tour operator, you usually earn less than if you freelance. Now, that comes with certain benefits. It also comes with certain disadvantages. It's not nice to earn less, but it is nice to get paid and to have work when other people are looking for work and there is no work. So That is the one option, full-time. You can also be a freelance guide who is available for contract work. Or you can be an operator guide that has their own wheels. That makes you a little bit more sellable because now you can offer direct to the public a service of guiding with a vehicle. You can be a local guide, an entrepreneur. Let's say you do walking tours and you meet people at the entrance to a hotel. So that makes you also an operator guide, but you're an entrepreneur at a local level. And you can be a private guide, which is the other extreme, where you get into the car with clients in Cape Town and you guide them privately all the way through the country and up to the Kruger National Park and possibly even into Zimbabwe or Zambia or one of the other countries in Africa. Right, so what is the work opportunity for a nature guide? Pretty much the same chances. You can be employed full-time. Let's say you drive an open safari vehicle full-time or an operator in the Kruger National Park. Or you can be a freelance guide that does exactly the same thing on a freelance basis. Or you can have your own open safari vehicle and now you're an operator. You can also be employed by a lodge in a full-time capacity. So now you're an employee again, working at a lodge. You can be working at lodges on a temporary basis as a freelancer so that when people go on rotation, I think most of the nature guides know what I'm referring to when I say rotation. Most of the adventure guides and culture guides don't have a clue. Basically, people working at lodges work on a cycle, a work cycle, and they take a certain amount of time off. Typically, it's 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off, but it depends on the agreement, the contract, and the lodge. Now, during that time off, other guides get rotated in. Sometimes a member of the management does guiding, but occasionally they use freelance guides for that. Freelance guides that are familiar with the reserve. So you will get a freelance guide that's a specialist in the Sabi Sand, and he does work at Inyati Game Lodge, he does work at Savannah, he does work at Idubi, and he basically freelances at all these different lodges, taking over the work of the guides that are on leave. And you can get the private guide entrepreneur in the nature business, who actually escorts people to reserves inside South Africa and often to reserves outside South Africa. Then you get adventure guides. Once again, they can be employed full-time, they can be available on contract, they can have their own wheels, or they can be a private guide, an entrepreneur. So those are the typical combinations. How do you improve your chances of getting work? Well, one of the easiest ways of doing it, maybe not easy, it depends on how much work you want to put in, but nothing is easy. So the more work you put in, the better things work, is by adding categories to your qualification. A lot of clients who want a private guide want to get into the vehicle with a private guide in the city and do culture activities, but they want to transition smoothly into nature activities and possibly even some adventure activities like walks. So if you qualified for all three categories, you can obviously do a lot more work. And that's one way of improving your opportunity. Another one is by having rare skills or specialized skills, such as additional foreign languages, or specializing in something like wine. Most guides in the Western Cape who are culture guides have done a wine course, but they are not necessarily wine specialists. So you will have guides that are specialized and have got a good relationship with the wine farms and with the estates, and they specialize in taking clients that have a very, very, very focused interest on the wine industry. You can have somebody with an interest in architecture who can discuss this in the cities and actually point out buildings and explain all sorts of interesting details that the average culture guide doesn't know. You also need to be flexible and reliable. This is the relationship with the TO. If you've been in the industry a long time, you probably know a lot of tour operators. And a lot of guides assume that because they've been in the industry a long time, they deserve to get paid better. But it's actually about building relationships. If tour operators know you and they know that you are flexible and that you can adapt and that you are reliable, you don't double book yourself and then not pitch up for a job although you confirmed it, you will get more work from them. You need to look at providing complete packages. The guide that has a vehicle might get more bookings than the guide that only sells the guide. So a guide and wheels is a more sellable combination than a guide only. A guide that has a B&B might take in bookings into the B&B and then sell guide services. Whereas a guide that doesn't own a BNB doesn't necessarily put people into that BNB. So those are all different things that can help you get work. And obviously advertising. You need to be visible to the tour operators, and you need to be visible to get direct bookings. So as your range of offerings and skills increases, so too do you get more work, and so too do you move away further from being a guide and closer to being an entrepreneur or an operator guide. Can a freelance guide be classified as an employee of a tour operator? Now, we have answered this. We haven't answered it in great detail. We've touched upon it. So if you're a freelance guide, can you be classified as an employee or not? Okay, so what do we have as results? We've got 13, that's 68% of participants, have said that a freelance guide can be classified as an employee, and 4 have said no. I've got bad news for the no's. If you work more than 3 days in a month, that is more than 24 hours, for a tour operator, that tour operator can classify you as an employee, especially if you've done it over a continuous cycle of more than 3 consecutive months. So you will have seen the case of many guides that received SMSs from National Department of Tourism stating that they are registered for UIF, and stating that because they are registered for UIF, they have not received a payout from the Tourist Guide Fund. Now, that has been queried. At NFTGA, we've taken it up with the Department of Tourism and asked them to relook. And what they've done is they've asked guides to send them one email, not many emails, stating the case, and they have resubmitted this to UIF, to the Department of Labor. And the reason for this is that in some cases, guides worked for an employer long ago who registered them for UIF. And since then, they have stopped working for that employer, and they have not been receiving or contributing to UIF. It does not mean, however, that they are not on the system. They are still on the system. So what UIF have done is they have taken out a list, and they said all these guides are registered for UIF, therefore they will not get. NDT has said that's not actually the way it should be, because some guides have not been contributing to UIF until recently. So what they've done is they've started looking at who has been contributing recently and who hasn't, and they will be paying out more guides. But the incredible part is that many guides who think they are not contributing to UIF have actually been contributing to UIF. And that means that there are operators that have been making UIF contributions without informing the guides. Or possibly they informed the guides, but the guides didn't really know. Or it may even be possible that they provided RRP5s or didn't provide RRP5s, but actually submitted them to SIFEs. So it's very interesting to see that an operator does UIF contributions. That can only be done for an employee. So based on the 24-hour per month rule, an operator should actually register a guide on the system as an employee and pay UIF. That is what we're going to be touching upon a little bit further. But yes, you can be registered as an employee, although you've got another question. There's actually 4 questions. Are freelancers classified as independent contractors? I think I've just answered this one. But are freelancers classified as independent contractors? Yes or no? Now, this is even scarier. Basically, we've got 16 yeses saying that freelancers are classified as independent contractors. No. And the reason for the no is that being a freelancer doesn't make you an independent contractor. It could make you an independent contractor, but it doesn't guarantee that you are one. We just answered that in the first question. So there's still a misunderstanding about the difference between being a freelancer and being an independent contractor. Okay, next question. Can a tourist guide be both an employee and an independent contractor? While you think about this one, can a tourist guide be both an employee and an independent contractor? I'll go back to the previous one and explain to you why a freelancer is not necessarily an independent contractor. We mentioned that in order to be an independent contractor, you need to fulfill the requirements. And being freelance does not make you fulfill those requirements, because you could be working more than 24 hours in a month over a period of 3 months for an operator that may decide to register you on the system as an employee. So, can a tourist guide be both an employee and an independent contractor? This is actually a trick question. I've got 9 no's and 8 yeses. So 9 people say you cannot be both freelance, employee and independent contractor, and 8 are saying that you can be. The 8 are correct. You can be both an employee and an independent contractor. In most cases, one tour operator will list you either as an employee or as an independent contractor. But if you work for multiple tour operators, which you should be if you're a freelancer, you should be working for more than one operator. In that case, you might be listed as an employee by one, as an independent contractor by another. So that's the same. Okay. And let's have a look. Last question. Does the tourist guide determine the itinerary and make changes to the itinerary without informing the tour operator? Okay, are we getting there? I'm waiting for the one that doesn't agree with everybody else, but I don't think there is one. So does a tourist guide determine the itinerary and make changes without informing the tour operator? Yes or no? Okay, we're at 89%. And that means Nick and just Nick, outstanding. Okay. Well, basically, the answer to this one is no. And everybody has said no. Why is it no? I think you all understand that if you make changes to an itinerary, there has to be a very valid reason. And that valid reason isn't one that the guide on their own comes up with normally. So it is something that has to be decided by the operator. You can call an operator and make suggestions. You shouldn't change an itinerary. So I'm glad to see that nobody is going to fall into that trap. But there's one little proviso that not everybody thinks about. When you make that change, if you make that change, what you need to do is you need to send it to the operator in writing, either as an SMS or a WhatsApp or an email as soon as possible, and you need to get a reply from the operator. Until you have that reply in writing, you do not have authorization to make any changes. Because if anything happens, any incident happens, any complaint comes in, you will be liable for that problem. So you need the operator